exclusively on ESPN Plus. UFC 313, Saturday. Reigning light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira defends his title against number one contender Magomed Ankalaev, and an explosive lightweight bout between Justin Gaethje and Rafael Pazzi. UFC 313, Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Buy it on ESPNPlus.com/PPV.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day. And that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
Employee Appreciation Day is March 7th, and a Starbucks card is the perfect way to say, thanks for all you do. Have a smaller team? You can send up to 10 e-gifts in one transaction from the Starbucks app or online at starbucks.com/gift. Or you can also send physical or digital cards in bulk at starbuckscardb2b.com. No matter your team's size or location, Starbucks has got you covered.
This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was getting frustrated by your forms. Now, Taxes is uploading your forms with a snap, and a TurboTax expert will do your taxes for you. One who's backed by the latest tech, which cross-checks millions of data points for absolute accuracy, all of which makes it easy for you to get the most money back, guaranteed. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
From the field to the film room to the war room, we've got you covered every step of the way as the road to the draft starts right now. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Armchair Scouts. I am your host, Shane Haff. You can follow me on Twitter at ShaneHaffNFL. I'm joined today by my co-host and fellow draft enthusiast, Dibes. Give him a follow on Twitter at Mr. Crockpot. Be sure to check out his podcast, Party on Broad. Dibes, how are you doing today?
Doing well, man. I'm excited to talk about a group that had some really fun Eagles fits, and I'm excited to get into it.
All right. Also joined by his co-host on Party on Broad, Ryan. Give him a follow on Twitter at Philly Sports PSA. Ryan, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing good. Ready to talk about one of my favorite position groups, even though Dives hates it. We'll still talking about it.
All right. We are going to unpack that a little bit later in the show. But last but not least, I'm joined by my co-host on Chalk Talk, Mark Henry Jr. Give him a follow on Twitter at Mark Henry Jr. _ and be sure to check out his Tough Cover radio show every Saturday. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, I feel like I was lied to about this tight end draft class throughout the season.
Same. And we are going to get into that. We are ranking our top 5 tight ends. We're going to go from 5 to 1, and we'll throw out some honorable mentions at the end. So, guys, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. Ryan, I'll throw it to you first, since this is your pet position group here. Talk to me about the guy that you have number 5.
All right. So I am going with Gunnar Helm out of Texas. Helm kind of, again, this isn't a strong, top heavy group, obviously, the names of that we'll be talking about, but Helm kind of slides in there because, he's just kind of a natural pass catcher. Really, I think from what I understand, only 2 drops in his entire collegiate career. So clearly has, hands for days, but he was a reliable, pass catcher, for Quinn Ewers in Texas. He ended up with 60 catches, just under 800 yards and 7 touchdowns for the Longhorns. And yeah, I mean, again, he's kind of a guy that can just be relied upon, has great body control, can be used to dominate the middle, honestly. But he's also a really good blocker. I would say better as a run blocker, but yeah, he's kind of he's an intelligent blocker. He kind of knows exactly where he needs to go and understands protection. And he's also a reliable pass protector as well. So listen, he could be could use a little bit more of a bulking up. Sometimes he seemed a little bit overwhelmed in some running schemes, but again, Texas didn't really run the ball all that much. But his kind of route tree probably could use some further expansion. But overall, he's a reliable. He's a leader, a veteran on that Texas team, and is easily somebody that I think under the right system can be utilized really, really nicely as an overall tight end, somebody who can block, somebody who can receive and be effective in the middle of the field. So Gunnar Helm's my 5th guy, and I think a lot of that is because I kind of had him kind of teetering there. His combine certainly kind of bumped him up for me. And into that 5th slot for me. So Gunnar Helm, Texas Longhorn.
All right. Gunnar Helm is 4th on Dibe's big board. He was actually 3rd on not our big board, sorry, our tight end rankings. He was 3rd for me. It'd be kind of crazy if he was 3rd on my big board. But he's 77th percentile height, but only 23rd percentile weight. So to kind of go along with what Ryan was saying, that he could bulk up a little bit. His combine wasn't great. It came out later. He sprained his ankle on a false start on the 40, and a picture came out of his swollen ankle. So you got to kind of discount a lot of that. But the big thing for me is he was primarily a blocker before the 2024 season. He became a big part of the passing attack in 2024 with 60 receptions for 786 yards. And I think he's a better receiver than a blocker right now, but he can clean up the blocking. It's erratic hand placement. He gets his hands out wide, and it causes him to draw penalties, to lose leverage. And of all the blocking issues you can have, that's the easiest one to fix. And so if you can fix that, and some of it you're going to have to bulk up your lower body a bit because it doesn't really generate displacement. But I think that right now, he blocks well enough that you can put him in line and make teams respect it. And I think that can get better. And so I think he's a decent receiver if you clean up the blocking. I would love to see him as a tight end too, in like a 12 personnel heavy team as a rookie. And I mean, that just screams Philadelphia Eagles. He's a guy that I think would be a great fit for the Eagles if, the board fell to the right spot. Him and another guy we're going to talk about in a minute. So Gunnar Helm is not your just elusive, exciting move piece tight end that never works out because he turns out he can't block and he's not athletic enough to be a receiver like Kyle Pitts turned out to be, although that might be usage related, like another guy Ryan and I are going to argue about here in a minute. But I'm intrigued by Gunnar Helm, and I want to see his pro day testing when it comes around. Dibes, anything that you want to add in on Helm? He was 4th on your list.
I really like him. I disagree. I think he's arguably the best blocking tight end in this group. I think he's right now a better blocker than he is a receiver. He's definitely raw in some areas, but he makes some crazy ass catches. I think I agree. We'll see how he does as pro day. I think his stock will regain in a month or so. But I think he's just above average in a lot of areas, and probably a safe tight end too going forward.
All right. Mark, let's throw it over to you for your tight end 5, who is also 4th for me. And Ryan, he's 3rd for Dibes. It's Mason Taylor. Why don't you talk to me about him?
Yeah, Mason Taylor is probably more of like the upside swing here. Younger, only coming out as a junior, but he played full as a freshman, full time, and started all the games that he was at LSU for as a freshman, sophomore, and junior. He's got tremendous bloodline. He's the son of Jason Taylor. Zach Taylor is his uncle. So obviously he's got NFL genes running through his veins there. Had 2 pretty good years in 2022 and 2023. Pretty identical, mid-30 catches, around 400 yards, 3 touchdowns the one year, 1 touchdown the next year. His targets almost doubled into this year, nearly 80 targets, 55 catches, just under 600 yards, still only 2 touchdowns. You'd like to see kind of the ability to make bigger plays, or especially in the red zone, and a pretty low number of touchdowns there from Taylor. But he kind of stole the show at the combine a little bit with the one, I think it's called the gauntlet drill, where he looked incredibly smooth. And you can see that on film as well. He's definitely a really, really smooth route runner. And I thought he definitely took a step in that this year. But again, I think you're kind of taking the traits, taking the body type, taking the NFL genes. I think you're kind of squinting and hoping he can develop into something he probably isn't right now. He's definitely not someone that I expect to be a blocker.
All right. Dibes, you had him at 3. Ryan and I both had him at 4. So why do you have Mason Taylor so much higher than the rest of not necessarily so much higher than the rest of us, but why do you have him at number 3? You're muted.
Muted.
Sorry, guys. I do believe in the traits. Tools wise, it's all there for him to be a tight end 1 potentially. I agree. He's all about projection. He's also not going to be 21 years old until May. A lot of the things that he needs to improve upon are things like adding bulk and more tech refinement. But in terms of just being a mismatch nightmare for an offense, I think he fits the Eagles really well with what the Eagles want to do. I think he's an okay blocker, but he's not elite in that area. Receiving wise, he can do a lot of the things that another guy we're going to be talking about and might be better at. And I'm going to believe in the projection over production in the MAC. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah. See, I actually said I thought he was a better blocker than receiver. That I think his blocking is what's going to get him on the field early while his route running develops, because he did have a really small route tree. Most of his receptions were within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, like the slide routes on split flow play action, hitches. Although 68% of his receptions were for first downs in 2024. So maybe you don't knock that too much, but he didn't run a lot of different routes. I think he does a good job of like sitting down in voids and zone coverage, but I thought he was pretty good as a blocker, and he's got some inconsistent like pad level. He'll get knocked back sometimes. He's going to need to improve his play strength to take on, defensive ends in the run game at the next level. But he's another guy like Mason Taylor and Gunnar Helm are 2 tight ends that I would enjoy seeing in Eagles green next year as a tight end too, because I think they both bring you similar things. They both bring you the ability to block in line. That makes defense respect it, which is huge for me, especially if you're going to be a tight end too. And they still bring some receiving chops. And I do think he's a solid receiver. I think he has good body control, and I think he generates separation in his routes that he runs. And so either one of those guys, I'd be pretty happy if one of those guys fell to the Eagles on day 2.
I have a take. I'm out on tight ends for the Eagles this year. I'm good. Just keep Goddard. I make the mid-round picks on positions that I'm much higher on, and have guys that there's like 10 to 15 guys at those positions. One of them's going to fall. My tight end 3 isn't going to be in my top 75. Like I'll just be honest. I'm totally. I mean, if it's Warren or Loveland, we can have a conversation. But even still, I'd probably look elsewhere in the first round. I won't be mocking a tight end to the Eagles in any of our mocks.
I think it's really likely for day 2. Really likely. The way there could be potentially trading Dallas Goedert, I think it's really on the table.
I don't think so. I think Calcaterra, they gave a lot of responsibility to last year.
No.
I think they're going to keep him around as the tight end too. I don't think improving on Calcaterra to one of these guys who I don't even know who will be better than him.
It's the biggest reason why I'm like pretty much out on Fannin. Not out on, that's a bad word. But we saw how much of a liability Calcaterra was in pass pro, and
you're right.
See from Fannin.
You're right, but can Calcaterra do anything that Fannin can do in the receiving game?
I like Fannin more than we'll get to it, but I like Fannin more than Dobbs and Shane. I have no interest in Fannin for the Eagles.
not even as a third rounder?
No, definitely not. Like I just there's just so many routes I'd rather go. I'd rather take the Gainwell replacement. I'd rather take the wide receiver 3 who could maybe replace Dotson if he doesn't develop next year. Like I'd rather take a developmental O lineman. I'd rather go 3 D linemen in the first 3 rounds than take one of these tight ends, whether it's 2 D tackles and 1 edge. I just pretty much any other position, even corner, you're losing Slay. Maybe you go with the safety if Chauncey's not here for the long term. I think tight end would be like last of my positions to look at personally.
Wow.
At quarterback. Well, QB Factory. You never know.
QB Factory, man.
Oh, boy.
Jackson Dart.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to get to Harold Fannin in just a second. Let's talk about the guy that's number 5 for both Dibes and I. He's number 4 for Mark. It's Elijah Arroyo out of Miami. 4-star recruit with the track background. He was a sprinter and a jumper. Saw limited action in 2021 as a true freshman. He was poised for a bigger role in 2022, and an ACL injury ended his season, and it cost him most of the 2023 season as well. But he's 6'5", 250 pounds. He's 22 years old. Among tight ends this year in this draft class with 50 or more reception or 50 or more targets, he would have ranked first in yards after the catch per reception at 9.9. If he qualified, he was just below that qualification. And so he is a yak threat. He ended with 590 yards this year, 7 touchdowns, but he's a high level athlete with explosive movement abilities, and it makes him a top yards after the catch threat. He can really threaten you there. And I think he's a really good route runner as well. He's got that sudden start-stop ability. He manipulates defenders. He can erase leverage with head fakes. He has a huge catch radius. He's tall. He's long. He's not afraid to go up and high point balls. And he's got untapped potential due to lack of reps. I mean, he only played 924 collegiate snaps across his 4 years. But he's a poor blocker. And that does limit you as a tight end, like we're going to talk about with Fannin here in a minute, not to keep bringing him up. But if you cannot line up in line and block, then defenses are going to treat you as a receiver. And so you better be darn good at it. And I'm not sure on that with him. Like, would you rather have him out there or just have another receiver? And, you know, if you do say him, are you going to be able to develop him as a blocker? Like, his punches are bad. He doesn't secure blocks. He's a negative there. And he's also a 1-year breakout player with an injury background. And so that's concerning. The medical checks for him will be huge. I put a late second round grade on him. I think his ideal usage is going to be like a flex tight end that can attack the middle of the field and the seams. You can use him for scheme touches out on the perimeter, but he is going to have to develop his blocking if he's going to be able to play in like an 11 personnel team and make teams respect it. Because we all know the running game is coming back. It's that cycle we swing on. If you can't block as a tight end, it's going to take some special usage to justify it. And I'm not sure if Arroyo is going to be able to develop as a blocker in that way. Dibes, what did I miss on Arroyo?
No, I agree. You're buying the athleticism. You're buying the upside. I do think there's a world he could develop into a tight end 1, the injury history is real. I mean, played 8 games between 2022 and 2023. He's got a really cool story, though. Learned to play football in Cancun, Mexico as a kid, moved to South Florida, then moved to Texas, chose to go to the Miami Hurricanes because he idolized guys like Jimmy Graham and Greg Olson and Jeremy Shockey and Kellen Winslow. But yeah, you're banking on this guy's upside. Super raw. But he's more of a big receiver, power slot kind of dude.
All right, Mark, anything you want to add in?
No, I think you hit on all of it. Yeah, I mean, I pretty much have my 3 through 5 lined up exactly. I think it's just a personal preference thing. To me, Arroyo, I think Arroyo and Taylor, I look at about the same blocking wise. Like I don't look at either as blockers. So the only reason I gave Arroyo the nod is because I thought he was a slightly better receiver. So I'm not the biggest fan of Arroyo. I'm seeing him creep up. I know he's in the ringers. I think top 40 on their draft guide, and so is I think Mason Taylor's in the top 50. I think people are getting carried away with putting these guys in the second round. And by the way, going back to what I said a minute ago with Ryan asking me if I would take him in the 3rd round, I'll have him graded out as a 3rd rounder, but just by the nature of it, I'm going to have a ton of guys in my top 80 who are available at pick 80, just by the nature of how the draft goes. So sure. The NFL GMs, believe it or not, aren't using my big board to go straight down the list to draft. But that was what I meant when I said that I will have a 3rd round grade on him. Same with Arroyo.
Can you imagine if one year for the draft, like they just came off the board in your exact order for the whole first round?
I'll tell you what, I think Howie has my order. I mean, when it goes to Carson Strong, that one year, Johnny Wilson, these late round guys he keeps swinging on that I fall in love with in the draft process for whatever. Hasn't went well, but he keeps taking my guys. I mean, not to be fair, I've loved like every pick he's made for like since Jordan Davis, basically. So I fall in line, but I think one GM has my rankings slid under the desk.
I'm just as obsessed as I am here with the NBA draft, and me and my buddies, we always get together for the NBA draft, and he got to number 22 mark straight through, got them all correct.
That's crazy,
insane. I've never seen it was just such a fun night.
All right. Well, that gets us through our 5s and 4s. Let's go to number 3 on our boards. Dives and I have already talked about ours, Gunnar Helm and Mason Taylor, but Mark and Ryan both have Harold Fannin Jr. at number 3 overall. He's not in Dives or I's top 5. Ryan, talk about your boy.
All right. Listen, I've allowed you to slander Mr. Harold Fanning Jr. and the Fanning name for too long. This is a guy that, listen, there is one thing that this guy does and does well. It is catch the ball. He is an absolute stud route running tight end. His footwork, tempo changes, consistency and getting separation, whether you put him in man, whether you put him in zone, whether, it does not matter. In fact, this guy was so productive that his yak alone would rank as the 3rd most receiving yards in a tight end last year. You can't make this stuff up. 117 receptions, 1,550 yards, 10 touchdowns, 1 actually on the ground. So he certainly can be used in that regard. And I think a lot of people are just so hung up on this. Oh, well, he can't block. And listen, I get it. People take this with a grain of salt, PFF. But according to PFF, Fanning Jr. did grade out at a 73.7 for run blocking, which made him the top graded pass catching tight end with run blocking. So I'm just saying there is the ability there. You take that with a grain of salt, like I said, with PFF. But all this guy does is produce, and you look him out on the field, and he is a man amongst boys. And you could even say, oh, well, he comes from a small school. Well, you know what? What he did when he had to face larger school, Penn State, Texas A&M, two ranked opponents. Penn State, he went 11 for 137 and a touch. Texas A&M, 8 for 145 and a touch. In fact, during his bowl game, he had 17 receptions, 213 yards and a touchdown. That's insane, breaking records all over the place. I just think people are a little bit wanting to tear this guy down with the blocking. Yes. Does it need a lot of work? Sure. Is it completely, unfixable? Absolutely not. He still is developing. He could use a little bit bulking up. He's a little bit undersized. And yes, he did not have the greatest of combines. But I look at what I see on the field, and that's what's most important in my eyes anyway. And the guy just produces. He looks like a stud out there. And that's what I choose to focus on. Yes, he's not perfect. None of these guys are, but I think people are a little bit going a little nuts with the lack of blocking ability. He needs help, yes, but run blocking, it's not bad.
I think Ryan hit on all of it there. I think that was a great job, and I agree that I think that the blocking is something that I don't think it's any any more of a non-starter than any of the other guys we've talked about so far in terms of Taylor and Arroyo. For me, he did have a rep where he kind of blew Abdul Carter off the ball. I saw that going around on Twitter when people were going at some of the people who were saying he was a big faller from the combine. He also had an 8.43 RAS at the combine. So obviously the 4.71 was disappointing, sure, but it's still a 7.88, like in terms of tight ends, if you look at it that way. I think tight ends now are kind of just faster than they were 10 to 15 years ago. So a little bit of that RAS chart is probably a little outdated for tight ends at this point. But I think that you look at the production that he had, and I think that the yak stat that Ryan pointed out is valid and kind of shows that I think the 4.71 is probably not indicative of how quick this guy can be. I saw a lot of people saying that he had terrible form on the 40-yard dash. I'd wonder if, a lot of these guys who come from bigger schools, they're gearing up for the combine with a staff that is like very aware of how to train guys to go to the combine. I wonder if Harold Fannin didn't have that at Bowling Green or whatever the case may be. I saw a lot of people talking about how kind of poor his mechanics were when running the 40 there. So I can't speak to that, intelligently. I'm not an expert when it comes to running mechanics, but I think when he was out there on the field, you saw him get open plenty. And I know that it's at a lower level. I feel like more than anybody, I'm usually the guy who's skeptical of the guys at lower levels, but I mean, the production is insane. 117 catches, 1,555 yards, 10 touchdowns, and he's only 20. He's 20 years old. So I do think that there's a lot to build on.
Yeah, great. And what are we building track stars or are we building football players? You know what I mean? Like if somebody's going to harp on that, I feel like that's just they're trying. They're trying a little too hard to break this kid down. So,
Dives, anything you want to add in?
Yeah, rebuttal, Dives.
I agree with the production. There's no doubt. But you look at the amount of targets he got. I mean, it was basically 12, 14, 13. There was a game where he got 22 targets in that bowl game. And a lot of those were schemed up touches, man. And getting him into open space. He had 32 catches at or behind the line of scrimmage last season. Not a guy with a lot of mass. That's why I don't buy the pass protection as of right now. Mark, you hit it on the nail on the head. He is only 20, so he's got plenty of time to catch up. But I don't see him as an inline guy. I see him as a tight end that is going to require a creative offensive coordinator, a gadget guy that's going to come in and out. I don't see tight end 1 in his future, and that's kind of my gut.
Yeah, he weighs 3 pounds more than AJ Brown, but he's 3.5 inches taller. Like, he's not going to line up in line. He's just
he can't
not.
play in the he can't play in the trenches. He just can't.
And so if he can't play in the trenches, you can still do that. Like the move piece, the big slot, and he has a lot of versatility. I mean, he aligned in the slot 32% of his snaps this last year. He aligned out wide 25% of his snaps. He was only in line 40%. He took snaps out of the backfield. He was given the ball on jet motion and direct snaps. Like, there is a fit for this guy in the NFL. And I think it's more as like a move piece, an H-back type thing, a big slot. Like, you're going to move this guy around, I think. But I don't think you're going to be able to play him in line. Because again, he's AJ Brown's weight, but 3.5 inches taller. And so there's a lot of weight he would have to put up to be able to get in line. And then once you do that, what's it's going to do to his athleticism? And I mean, yeah, his RAS score wasn't like bad for a tight end, but if you run it as a receiver, it's like a 5.3. And I think that's more like what he's going to have to do. He's going to have to be a big slot. And so that concerns me. I think he's got really good yak ability, and obviously his production's great. He has great hands. He only dropped 3 passes in his 3-year career. All 3 of them were this year too, which is weird. That's always weird to me. But he's got a big catch radius. He's not afraid to go up and make plays into contact. He's good in contested catch situations, but I just circle back to I don't think he has the ability to play in line. And so if that's the case, unless I have like I'm a creative play caller with a specific plan for how I'm going to use this guy in a lot of different alignments and as a gadget type thing, I'd rather just draft a receiver if that's what I'm going to use him as. And so that's the thing for me. Like, what's his ceiling? What's his position? I mean, he is relatively inexperienced at the position. He's coming from a non-premier school, right? He converted to tight end at Bowling Green. He played defensive back and wide receiver in high school. And so new to the position, coming from a non-premier school, maybe he just takes off when he gets NFL coaching. You don't know. There's so much unknown about these guys, but he's a guy that, you know, I ended up with a 3rd round grade on him, and I hope he succeeds because I think he's got a cool story. I just think this type of guy doesn't often work out as at tight end. Then again, this type of guy is usually the guy everybody talks themselves into taking in the 1st round when they shouldn't be there. And I don't think that's going to happen with him. But so that's kind of my thing on Harold Fannin. I don't hate the guy. I don't hate any of these prospects, but I legitimately, because you guys know I don't follow college nearly as closely as you guys do. I really dive into draft stuff after the NFL season is over. And from like just things I heard on Twitter and whispers and rumors in the air, I expected this guy to be like I was going to watch him and be blown away. And like, this guy's like the 3rd 1st round grade in the tight end. And when I watched him, I was just like, man, I don't get it. And I mean, I get the production and things, but that's just kind of where I'm at with him. So he ended up being my tight end 7. I got a 3rd round grade on him, and we'll see where he goes. We'll see what happens with him. I'm sorry, Ryan. Ryan and I have been going back and forth in Discord for a few days now.
It's all right, Shane. It's okay. You said you.
I question if he can beat press coverage. I think at least early on he's going to have to get scheme touches in the NFL.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into the top 2 where there is less controversy, and in fact, we're all consistent.
No controversy.
No controversy at all. We all have Colston Loveland out of Michigan 2nd. We all have Tyler Warren out of Penn State 1st. Dives, why don't you lead us off with Colston Loveland?
All right. I would love to see the Eagles draft him. There's a lot worse routes the Eagles could do at number 32 if he's sitting there. Just tight end 1 upside. He was kind of bogged down in a run-heavy offense in 2024 with Michigan. But, man, when it comes to route running, ball skills, elite athleticism, contested catch ability, body control, this guy checks off all the boxes. He moves like a natural receiver, an elite size natural receiver, probably a little more of a big slot than a true inline player. Passing weapon first and foremost. He's a guy that can dominate in the middle of the field, down the field, out-breaking patterns to the sideline, beat a variety of coverages. I think he'd be best in an offense that runs a lot of 12 personnel. And I think creating mismatches, using that athleticism, using that size, using that speed, that should be his bread and butter at the next level. I see him as a mismatch flex tight end in the NFL. He didn't really do much at the combine, but dude, nearly 6'6", 248 pounds. That size, that weight, man, should make him some of the highest upside of any tight end in this group. I absolutely love Colston Loveland.
Yeah. Mark, anything you want to add on Loveland?
Yeah, I don't think it can be emphasized enough just how pathetic Michigan's quarterback situation was this year and how terrible the passing game was. And him having 56 catches for 582 yards and 5 touchdowns, he should get like a Purple Heart for that, or like a Nobel Prize. It's unbelievable how terrible their quarterback play was, and for him to, and the year before with JJ McCarthy, and a year where they still didn't throw the ball all that much, he had 45 catches for 649 yards and 4 touchdowns, and that was at age 19 when he was a sophomore. He's another guy, only 20 years old. So Colston Loveland is a guy who I'm actually a little bit higher on than consensus. I think I have him fringe top 15. I think I have him around 15, actually. I had him in the top 10 before shuffling a couple things around with some D linemen. But he's a guy who I'm really high on. But he isn't a guy who I'm like dying for the Eagles to take at 32. Again, like I just think that if we're looking at the needs that we're going to have in the next couple of years, I don't think Goddard's going to ever command a crazy salary. So I think it's almost worth just kind of riding out what Goddard gives you over the next couple of years at the $8 to $12 million number that he's probably going to be around. I would probably look to plug other holes like the ones that I mentioned earlier, even though I like Loveland. I have Loveland at 15. I think that there's probably just like O lineman and D lineman that I'm going to have like 16 to 25 who I'd probably rather the Eagles draft.
I have him number 21 on my big board.
Yeah. My first line on my strengths for Loveland was that he has impressive ball skills. He's able to adjust to poorly thrown passes and bring them in anyways, something he has lots of experience with. I think he's interesting because he's well-versed as a route runner from different alignments, and I think he puts defenses into a bit of a bind deciding, like, who do you cover him with and from where? Like, when they put him out wide, you can't put a cornerback on him, right? Because he can bully him off the ball, and he can separate from corners with physicality. He can separate from linebackers and safeties with just his route running ability. And on top of that, I think he's got a good understanding of like where to settle down against zone. So I think he's really good as a receiver, even though he doesn't have a lot of production. The one strange one for a guy his size, he is not good in contested catch situations whatsoever. And he could probably add a little bit more mass as well. He was 89th percentile height, only 48th percentile weight. But I just think he's a solid all-around player that you can put in the slot. You can put him in line. You can use him in different ways. I'm really curious to see where the NFL ends up valuing Colston Loveland. All right. Anybody else want to add anything in on Loveland before we move on?
So good, so good, so good. New markdowns up to 70% off are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Fresh kicks, spring tops, new dresses. There's always a score.
I mean, the denim section is unreal.
Why do I rack? All the dresses. I always find something amazing.
Head to your Nordstrom Rack store to find can't-miss deals on all the spring things. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
All right, well, that takes us to our consensus number one guy. It is Tyler Warren, tight end out of Penn State. Mark, why don't you lead us off?
The guy is an absolute beast. He's just a guy. We talk about certain teams you throw on, and one guy jumps off the screen more than anybody else. And obviously Abdul Carter on the other side of the ball. But on offense, they built the entire plane out of Tyler Warren. At Penn State, 104 catches, 1,233 yards, 8 touchdowns. Just a couple absolutely incredible games where he absolutely took over at the tight end position. 17 catches for 224 yards against USC, and a touchdown in that game. 8 catches and 127 and a touchdown against Purdue. 8 for 102 and a touchdown against Minnesota. 6 for 63 and 2 touchdowns against Boise in the playoffs. Even against Notre Dame in the game they lost, 6 catches for 75 yards there. In a game where the receivers literally didn't get a catch and they were still in the game and still able to put up a good amount of points in that game, 24 points in that game. And Tyler Warren, if Tyler Warren was on the field, I don't think they put up 10. He was just incredibly important. He wears 44 because his dad showed him John Riggins highlights growing up, and he wanted to run the ball like him. And he does. I mean, he is an absolutely brutalizing runner at the tight end position in a way that I don't even know if it really exists at the tight end position in the NFL right now. I think the closest thing to it is probably Dallas Goedert and the way that he kind of stiff arms guys. Tyler Warren is more adept to completely just run you over and trample over you than Goedert, who's probably just more likely to continuously stiff arm you 20 yards throughout the field. So it's a little bit different. But to me, it feels like, with Tyler Warren, I don't know what the scale is, I guess, but it feels like you're landing somewhere on the scale between Dallas Goedert to TJ Hawkinson, or if you think that this guy is going to be kind of a game changer, he could just be, Terminator Brock Bowers, like maybe just a little bit more kind of dominant when it comes to running people over, but maybe not quite the route runner and receiver that Bowers is overall. But I think who's better, Hawkinson or Goddard? When Hawkinson was at their peak, probably Hawkinson.
I think I always think Goddard is better than other people do. I just think he's been injured and doesn't have the volume to support it. I think if Goddard was in a different offense, he's a consensus like top 4 tight end.
That could be true. Yeah, I mean, I think he lands on somewhere on the Goddard to Hawkinson to Bowers scale, and I don't think there's this is how famous last words. This is how Kyle Pitts happens. But I really don't think that there's a chance Tyler Warren's worse than Goddard, the Goddard Hawkinson level of tight end.
Yeah. All right. Ryan, what do you want to add in there on Warren?
Honestly, Mark hit it square on the head there. He is clear cut. Just dominant and more so than any other tight end in this group. And honestly, with the exception of Bowers, he's one of the better tight end prospects that we've had in some time. He does everything at an exceptional level. Blocking wise, he's not afraid to get nasty. He's not afraid to get dirty. He does all the little things. In fact, he almost seems to enjoy it. And then you look at him as a receiver, and he is as reliable as that gets. You can, put him anywhere you want. on the line, and he's going to make a play. It's a shame that Penn State didn't go further. The games that they lost and the games that they were out on, it's when they didn't utilize Tyler Warren as much as they should have. He was an absolute offensive catalyst for that squad, and I think he is going to. I think the Goddard Hawkinson thing that Mark talked about, I think that's honestly that's the worst case scenario. Just given the skill set, that is absolute worst case scenario, which goes to show you he's going to be a great player in the NFL.
Yeah, he's massive frame, makes difficult catches. He's an accuracy eraser. He's got tremendous hands. He only had one drop on 106 regular season targets this year. Brought in 67% of his contested catches over the course of his career. And he's a former quarterback too. So he understands defenses and where to settle up against zone coverage. And I think he's a good run blocker. He's got the size and strength to be an elite run blocker if he irons out some technical deficiencies, but he's good as is. I don't think he has elite speed, and he's maybe not like the best separator in coverage, but he does know how to position his body like relative to defenders to maximize that throwing window. And I just think, like you said, I think he's rock solid. I think he's going to be a great get for whoever goes and gets him.
He's very, and I don't mean to compare him directly, but in what you just said, I think he's very Gronk in that way, where Gronk was certainly not the fastest guy, but man, he controlled his body to be exactly where it needed to be to make a catch, and almost kind of box out his defenders. And Warren does it very similarly, and I think that portion is again kind of, I don't want to call him Gronk, but I'm saying in that regard, I think he does that very, very Gronk-like.
All right. Well,
can
guys,
I just on that? Yeah, real quick. He's not Brock Bowers. I had Brock Bowers, a much higher blue chip athlete than Tyler Warren. I mean, I made this during the preseason, and look, what will his production look like with more snaps in 2024? Tyler Warren had an amazing 2024 season, but Brock Bowers was elite the second he stepped on the college football field for 3 years. Tyler Warren's a fifth-year player, and that's worth being said. That, Tyler Warren just had a terrific year, but I'd put Tyler Warren just below Brock Bowers if we're being equal.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to make. And, Brock Bowers was dominating from the moment he was there as a freshman at Georgia. So 56 catches, 882 yards, and 13 touchdowns as an 18-year-old freshman for Bowers when he was at Georgia. I do think it's important to point out, I mean, we all had Bowers top 3, top 5. I'm going to have Warren as a fringe top 10 guy in what is a much worse class than Bowers was in. So to point out the difference, Bowers is a much, much better prospect. I was merely pointing that out as like an absolute ceiling of, if you're in love with Warren and you're taking him at 9, you think he can have the type of impact that Bowers had. I mean, obviously the Raiders were bad, but that was kind of what I was saying about the ceiling.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
But in a draft where there's some question marks, especially at the top, there's not a lot of big time names at the top. Like Tyler Warren is a sure thing, and that's why he's number 10 on my big board.
He's 9 for me. Yeah.
All right, so there you have it, guys. Our top 5, just to recap here, we all went Tyler Warren 1, Colston Loveland 2. I have from 3 to 5, Gunnar Helm, Mason Taylor, and Elijah Arroyo. Mark has Harold Fannin Jr. at 3, Elijah Arroyo, and Mason Taylor. Dibes, Mason Taylor, Gunnar Helm, Elijah Arroyo, and Ryan is Harold Fannin, Mason Taylor, and Gunnar Helm. And so there you have it, our top 5. There's always some guys we can honorable mention, shout out, and so we'll throw around the board. I know Mark said his was going to be Gunnar Helm, and we already talked about him. But Dives, did you have anybody you want to honorable mention shout out here?
Let me go last.
Okay. All right. Ryan, do you have anybody you would like to honorable mention?
Yeah, I should have went the Mark route. Got out of it, but no, I'll say somebody that is been intriguing me for the last 2 years is Mitchell Evans out of Notre Dame. His production certainly has been underwhelming. You were really hoping to see a jump this year, and honestly, I think his usage just didn't really match. I think his potential to be an impactful tight end for the Irish. He certainly is somebody that flourishes in those medium to deep routes, given just his size and his hands. He has great body control. He has a good feel for zone coverage, able to kind of sit in those soft spots, and he also can be very physical when it comes to as a receiver or as a blocker. I think his instincts are there, his coachability, his leadership, all the things you want a prospect to be. I just think some of the kind of the groundwork for him to build up needs some work. He does have some injury history that obviously is certainly something, and that's also part of his production woes, so to speak. I just see him when he's healthy and when he's being utilized. I really do like him, and I think there's some potential in Mitchell Evans at the next level.
All right. You're always on shaky ground if you honorable mention shout out a guy from Notre Dame that Mark didn't bother to bring up. But
that's so true. I should have thought about that.
After the injury with him, he just never looked quite the same as he did pre-ACL in 2023. And even though the production in 2023 was never there, he was we had a really bad passing game and quarterback situation. So I don't think that was necessarily his fault. And he showed a lot of flashes and looked like a guy we were really excited about for this year. Even with the ACL, was a guy we were really excited about for this year. And his numbers actually were a little bit better than I remember when I was just looking back at them. But there's no separation there at this point, or at least there wasn't 1 year removed from the ACL. Maybe that'll be different in 2025. He didn't run that slow. I think he ran a 4.74. I don't think he's an NFL player. I'll be honest, but the combine actually was a pleasant surprise for me. Apparently, he did pretty well in the gauntlet as well. So I'm rooting for him.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. I think the hope is anyway that a full year removed.
Yeah.
That and you see it all the time. It does take some time to really get acclimated, to really trust yourself, and hopefully that has a lot to do with Mitchell Evans. So
it's worth noting I did get cooked more than a few times by Mitchell Evans in EA Sports College Football 25. For some reason, he's pretty good in that game.
All right. Well, my honorable mention, I'm going to go to Oregon and shout out Terrence Ferguson. This guy, he's a 4-star recruit, first team All Pac-12 in 2023. He holds the Oregon record for most receptions and touchdowns by a tight end over the course of his career. And his production's not gaudy. He never topped a 600-yard season. He never topped 6 touchdowns. But I do think he's a top-level athlete. 83rd percentile height, 43rd percentile weight. He had a 98th percentile vertical, 91st percentile broad jump, and a 92nd percentile 40-yard dash, which all comes out to a 9.81 relative athletic score. So top-level athlete. I think he's able to threaten up the seam with his speed. He's able to run away from coverage on crossing routes, and he has really good ball tracking ability. He can contort his body to off-target throws above him and elevate. He can get ones that are behind him. He's not a very good blocker. He's got technique issues that could be developed in time, and I think his size helps with that. but he's not physical at the catch point. He's poor in contested catch situations. And for a guy that had such a high yards after catch per reception, he led qualifying tight ends in yak per reception. He was surprisingly easy to bring down. I think he just runs away from people at times. And I don't think he's the best route runner either. It is more that he just runs away from people. But there's a place for that. You can carve that out. I think fits best as like a developmental flex tight end and a vertical passing offense. So, late day 2, early day 3, maybe he's the guy you take a flyer on if that's your flavor of tight end. So Terrence Ferguson from Oregon, the guy I'll shout out. Okay, Dibes, can I ask you now?
Yeah. I'll go Arondé Gadsden out of Syracuse.
Yeah.
More of yet another big wide receiver, former wide receiver here, 6'5", 236 pounds. He didn't do as well as I expected at the combine. 34-inch vertical jump, a 9'6" broad jump. He's got great length, huge catch radius. Not a good blocker, but if you're like some of these other guys we mentioned, if you're looking for a fluid mover, some positional versatility, a day 3 guy that has some upside, maybe Arondé Gadsden's your guy.
All right. Well, there you have it.
Wilson at home.
I do want to quickly answer Daniel's question here. He asked, I'm curious, why do tight ends have such a high fail rate in the NFL? Because there might be 2 great ones in the last 3 drafts. It's
fair. There's 3. If we're counting Laporta didn't have a good year this year, but he was pretty amazing as a rookie. McBride and Bowers are probably the 2 top tight ends. And McBride came in 2022, Bowers in 2024. Both were the top drafted tight ends of those seasons. I think we might be getting past that. You probably could make that case for a long time. I think the last 3 years kind of bucked the trend a little bit.
Yeah, tight ends traditionally have struggled because, like, if you're a receiver, you need to be able to be a receiver, right? If you're a lineman, you need to be able to block. If you're a tight end, you got to be able to do both. And so many of these guys are either used as a receiver and they can't block, they're not asked to, or they're asked to block and they never run routes. And so I just don't think you get a lot of guys coming out that have been asked to do both things that an NFL tight end has to be able to do. And so I think we overrate the ability to just say, oh, this guy's a good pass catcher, we can teach him how to block. And it's not always that simple. So that would be my answer for why I just don't think you get a lot of well-rounded guys coming out. They do one over the other.
And if you're also talking about the hit rate, and we're talking about like the gross amount, just like number wise, the amount of guys that pop, like you kind of just said, you need to be able to do both. A lot of guys who trend towards being a really good blocker end up becoming an offensive tackle. A lot of guys who trend towards being a really good receiver slim down and become a wide receiver. And you look at the first round and the second round, there's just so many more wide receivers drafted and so many more O linemen drafted, so many more D linemen drafted, so many more D backs, corners specifically drafted. And it's tight end. If you're just looking at the raw amount of players that are drafted high, it's not a high number. So once you're kind of talking about like a 5 to 10 guy sample size over a 10 to 15 year period of top 30 picks, if 2 or 3 guys bust out or go to the wrong situation, it makes the numbers maybe look a lot worse. And that's another thing. Tight end might be one of the most dependent situations on dependent on situation positions in football in terms of getting publicity and becoming a household name. Because think about it, like how we evaluate the tight end position. Obviously there's guys like George Kittle who we understand provide an extra service as a blocker, but we most people, casual fans, I think, look at the fantasy football tight end rankings at the beginning of the year and look at the guys who have put up the most fantasy points and have the most receptions and yards and touchdowns at the position. And a lot of that's going to be dependent on being in a system that actually values tight end and being in a system that has a good quarterback.
All right. Well, there you have it, guys. Our thoughts on the landscape of tight ends in the NFL currently. I guess we got into a little bit with Hawkinson and Goddard and the hit rates and things. Our top 5 rankings, some honorable mentions. I hope you guys enjoy this show. If you like this stuff, we already have our quarterback rankings and our interior defensive lineman rankings out. We're going to be going through running backs next week, and we'll get through every position group before we get to the draft. So you guys keep it tuned here to the Eagles Pinpool Network, specifically to the Armchair Scouts. We've got you covered for all of your draft stuff. Follow these guys on Twitter. Ryan is at Philly Sports PSA. Dibes is at Mr. Crockpot. Mark is at Mark Henry Jr. _. I am at Shane Hath NFL. And we will catch you guys next time.